You are listening to Inside the Hive on the All Hornets podcast network. One podcast feed with multiple shows, making sure we cover the Charlotte Hornets from every angle. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and leave a 5-star review. The All Hornets podcast network is affiliated with the Fans First Sports podcast group. On today's show, we are going to touch on Hornets 9 and 60, touching on all Hornets 9 rotation players in under 60 minutes, giving our kind of key thoughts on each, both good and bad. That's going to be the focus of today's show. But before we quite get onto that, Chase, welcome in. How you been getting on?
I've been doing very well, settling into the groove of the regular season here. We had our first Hornets back-to-back over the weekend. So a very dramatic split in classic Hornets fashion, but I've been doing pretty well here. How was your week off last week and your vacation down to the south of England?
Yeah, I had a great time. It meant I took in a little bit less Hornets basketball, but that's okay. We have to take our breaks as and when they come. And judging from the Brooklyn game, which I missed, I don't think I missed them much.
Not in that game, especially. Definitely.
You go into that game and they're missing like Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton. You think, oh, this is a great chance. Get a kind of like a win against a down team, and just got smoked. But look, I'm glad we recorded after the last 2 back-to-back games, because I think the tone of the show probably would have been very different if it was just recorded after those 3 losses in a row. Hornets sitting at 2 and 4. I'm not even going to tell you where they are in the Eastern Conference. It doesn't matter. We're 6 games in. But there's been good and bad. And we're going to touch on all of that today in our 9 and 60, which I think is the first time we have done this format on the podcast. And it might be something that we try every now and then throughout the year. And it's just a great way to kind of touch on a bunch of different guys and kind of like zoom out a little bit and talk about, last episode we focused on Brandon Miller. This episode, we want to just touch on everybody, because we've got six games now of sample size, upcoming back-to-back, or upcoming 2 games against the Washington Wizards, which would be interesting to see there. But how is this going to work is we're going to talk about each player, starting with LaMelo Ball, going down position. So we're going to go Theo, Rozier, Gordon, Hayward. You get the idea. Then back through the backup rotation as well. We're going to have around, I think it was, what did I say, Chase? Was it 5 minutes we worked out to be? I can't even remember what I told you now.
Yeah, it was about, I think it was 3 to 5 minutes around for each player, kind of rapid fire through each guy, but give it a little detail for each one, as now that we've got a little bit more of a sample size to parse through here.
Yeah, I think, so I figured it out. 9 players, 60 minutes. That was going to be, this is great podcasting right here. 6 minutes per player. There we go. We got 6 minutes per player. So when that 6 minutes is up, you're going to hear our good friend MC Hammer.
Stop. Hammer time.
Every time the 6 minutes up. And that is code for us that we need to move on to our next player. So, Chase, are you ready to go for the first ever 9 and 60?
I am ready. Let's do it.
Okay, let's get off. LaMelo Ball. Wow, what an interesting start to the season. I used the word interesting following his 4th quarter last night, where he just erupted. And to be honest, I thought the whole Dallas game, he was actually really good. Was it 9 or 11 assists at halftime, which was, even though his shot wasn't falling in the first half, his pick and roll game last night against Dallas was just unbelievable in that first half, and then finished the game scoring the ball too. But let's be honest, before that point, Chase, and maybe before the 4th quarter in Houston, you have to say that so far this year, it has been a tough ride for LaMelo Ball. I think it's the rare case where you look at the stats, and I think they're actually better than the eye test has been. The eye test for LaMelo Ball has been pretty brutal. His turnovers are up. His fouls are up. His shooting from deep is off. And he just looked a little bit indecisive out there, I think. And LaMelo Ball we talked about his lack of scoring around the rim, his lack of scoring in the mid-range. He's always been quite reliant on that 3-point shot, and that's always worked for him, right? And I think now we're seeing the difficulty of when you have a LaMelo Ball who isn't scoring from 3 at will, and how else can you score in the game? I think his mid-range this year is down to 29%, just looking really unsure from that mid-range area. So, look, there has been some green shoots with that 4th quarter in Houston, with that Dallas game. Obviously, that Dallas game was at 30 points, 12 assists, 10 rebounds. Like, what an unbelievable performance. But I don't think all this, like, LaMelo is back. Well, let's hope so, right? But I don't think we can just disregard the first 5 games where LaMelo really struggled. And if I'm being honest, Chase, tell me if I'm wrong. If LaMelo Ball just has like average LaMelo performances in this first 5 games, I think the Hornets are like 3-3, 4-2. But he actively really hurt the team just with his inefficiency, turnovers, and fouling in those first few games. Do you think that's fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think you're wrong. I don't know if it's necessarily like which games that he's going to be flipping with a good performance as an individual, but just like the confidence that he would instill in that offense in general by being a consistent shooting threat and the way that teams are going to have to defend him when he does eventually pick that up, obviously is going to change the outcome of a game against a team that's not very good per se, like the Nets or the Rockets or the Pistons. So any of those 3 games could have gone the other way if LaMelo had been building up any sort of a rhythm going into it. But I mean, up until the fourth quarter of that Dallas game, he had not been in rhythm in any way. Like, it's just shooting is inefficient across the board. There's no area of the floor or shooting range from which he's efficient right now. There's been nothing positive to glean from that so far. I mean, he's impacted the game in a variety of ways. Otherwise, his passing is obviously really good. I'm pretty sure 9.3 assists is, I think it was 4th in the NBA right now, is at least top 5. So that's obviously still being a productive part of his game. But apart from that, the defense that we saw in the preseason has still been pretty good. But you said the fouling has been so high up. I mean, he fouled out of the game that he had a triple-double against Dallas, which I feel like it's a very rare thing for a player to get a 30-point triple-double and still foul out at the end. And a lot of it is, I think, just frustration and a lack of, maybe focus from being, 0 for 5, 0 for 6 from 3.
And how long have we been
talking
talking
the second
about
half
this
of
now?
games?
Like,
right,
since his rookie year. We were talking in like the second, after 10 games rookie year, we're like, oh, the fouling he'll sort out. Like, he'll mature, he'll figure out not to get frustrated and go pick up silly fouls. He'll adapt to NBA defense. And it's still a consistent issue. And we are now going into whatever year now, year 4 of LaMelo Ball, and he's still taking himself off the floor at times. It's really one of the most frustrating things because it's completely controllable. And by now, it should have been corrected. And this, like, again, just signals a lack of, why aren't you learning and adapting here, LaMelo? Like, this is something that you can control, and you're not. You're not learning from your past mistakes. It is a concern.
I completely agree. I mean, I think he's been good in ball screens, and you mentioned his pick and roll offense. His pick and roll defense, I think, has also been pretty good, but it's just the committing shooting fouls that are completely needless, or like reach in fouls, or just in bad time situations, just committing these and taking, again, like you said, taking yourself out of a game. Not that it was really in the balance still when he fouled out of that Dallas game, but I mean, you can't have something like that happen frequently.
And he has had moments, right? He had that obviously game-winning play on Tyrese Halliburton. That was a great play. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely, yes.
He won them the game.
That was probably his worst defensive game of the season to that point, too. Tyrese Halliburton had 41 points in that game leading up to that point.
I tweeted earlier in the game that this, like, he's flashed moments, but it's still not a consistent quarter-to-quarter full game of defense. There are moments where he seems really engaged. He seems to pick and choose when he does it. That moment he chose to do it, and he showed he can, which makes it even more infuriating when at other moments he doesn't. But yeah, inconsistent, some progress, but still frustrating. One last thing just to finish on here before we move on. This year, attempts at the rim, 21% of his shots came at the rim last year. That's up to 34% at the start of this year. Now, shooting percentages, I don't pay too much attention to early in the season, but actually like shot diet and play style, those stats you can actually put a little bit more credit into. And that's something I absolutely think with LaMelo, we've been saying for years that he needs to put a greater effort onto driving the ball, trying to secure in the paint, not relying on that floater. And he's been doing that, which is good, but it's also just been ugly because he's not been finishing. And apart from that, I think one game in Detroit where he got free throws, he struggled to get to the foul line. So it's good that he's trying to get to the rim more. That's obviously been clear from Steve Clifford, but the efficiency is yet to come. But like, you got to try it. I'm glad he's experimenting. I've seen some different finishes. I'm hoping that's a short-term loss for a long-term gain.
All right. We heard our friend MC Hammer on to Terry Rozier for number 2. Obviously, the biggest thing with Terry right now is the groin strain that he suffered in that game against the Pacers. But being listed as questionable against Dallas was a huge relief because in the moment, it looked like he could have been out for like the foreseeable future with his reaction to it, because he's not a
I
guy
thought
that
so.
reacts strongly to like, bumps and bruises or anything. So I really thought that he might have been out for a couple weeks or something when that first happened, because he could barely walk and was like grimacing the whole way off the court, but only questionable against Dallas. So we'll see how long that maintains, but he could be back here in the next couple of games. So definitely a good sign. But
How does that happen with NBA players? They go down like can't walk and
right,
like
yeah,
be back in a few games. I was expecting to get the Hornets PR statement with a with a MRI result, and it just never came.
yeah. No, I was very, and it was a non-contact injury too, from what I believe. He just kind of came up limp, like coming around a screen. So I'm definitely glad he's okay, but it looked a lot worse than it ended up being in the moment for sure. But he actually has a somewhat of a similar problem to LaMelo right now. Very inefficient from 3. He's actually shooting pretty well from the rim and from like floater range in the mid range right now, but he's only 25.8% from 3. So another like reason that the Hornets offense wasn't so good in those first couple of games was him and LaMelo both just could not throw the ball in the ocean from the side of a boat in those first, basically until they got through that Nets game. The last couple games against the Pacers and the Mavericks, they were a little better. Obviously, Terry didn't even play against the Mavericks, but still, the rim finishing is pretty good for him, but the threes not there yet. And something I've actually been thinking about a lot with him too is with Brandon Miller's emergence early in the season, and we'll talk more about him later, but Terry's role is actually like a little bit interesting to me, because you probably want to use Brandon Miller a lot as that second unit playmaker as well. He's also kind of one of your best off-ball shooting threats. And if Brandon Miller ends up becoming a more efficient three-point shooter sooner than Terry Rozier, he becomes the bigger threat and the easier target for LaMelo in that regard. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how Terry's role evolves. Maybe he becomes more of like a playmaker or like a shot creator as like an on-ball, like isolation, late shot clock guy, kind of like more towards what Gordon Hayward does for the team in the offense right now. But definitely going to be curious to see just how soon he comes back from that groin injury first. But once that he settles back in from there, we'll see how it continues to evolve. But James, what are your thoughts on Terry Rozier so far this season?
Yeah, I mean, Steve Clifford came into the season saying he's been the best player in training camp over the summer. To be honest, from what I've seen, it's been like more of the same, really. Apart from the 3-point shooting hasn't been there, but he's actually been better at scoring in the paint. Like his driving, finishing around the rim has been. My eye test was really good. I checked the stats; it's pretty in line with previous years. But like you say, 18% from the corners, 32% from above the break. A few years ago, Chase, we were talking about Terry Rozier being one of the best off-ball shooters in the NBA, like from the shooting guard position. That's a conversation we had, and the stats backed it up. And it wasn't the case last year. We put that down to injury, playing more on ball. At the start of this year, I don't know what the excuse is. Maybe it's just shooting variance and he's going to come back. But if he shoots another like 32, 33% year from 3, then that really does recalibrate where you are, because all of a sudden, you're counting him in to be like a 38, 39 3-point shooter on high variance and high volume. And he just doesn't look for it as much anymore. His rate's gone down. So he's still these moments where he gets like, he's got hot late in fourth quarters in a couple of games, but still his bigger strength has been slashing to the rim. And that's improved. That looks better. And we shouldn't forget about that. But this team as a whole is shooting the 3-ball terribly. Not just shooting the ball terribly, but not getting any attempts. And Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball, but Terry specifically, like he has to be better at that for this offense to score at a efficient rate throughout the season.
A big piece of the Hornets being like a fast-paced, up-tempo team is also being a team that's a very good three-point shooting team. Terry is probably the biggest part of that, given that LaMelo is going to be the one driving those transition possessions and those up-tempo possessions a lot of the time. So you really, really need that off-ball threat and that guy that can just float out to the three-point line at really having any given opportunity off of a make or a miss and be somebody that can stretch the defense out for you. But right now, Terry has not been that guy through a couple of games. But I do think he's actually been maybe a little bit better than we would have expected as like a secondary playmaker when LaMelo sits. He's at 5 assists per game, which is what he was averaging through the season last year in that same role. I mean, he seems to have like fully settled into that like secondary playmaker role when LaMelo is not on the court or when he's not available for whatever reason. So at least you can rely on him to do that, even through the shooting struggles, which obviously was the case last year too. So it's definitely pretty impressive that he's been able to evolve his game that way, because when he came to the Hornets, that was not something he was very effective at. The Hornets were not a good offense when he was the lead ball handler, but now it's definitely taken a step up.
Well, this is the thing. The eye test for me still isn't great. It's still like slow. It feels like
it doesn't look great.
It's a lot of ISO ball, but you check the stats on it, and the Hornets are actually a net plus and point differential when Rozier plays point guard than when LaMelo Ball does, which like just does not match the eye test at all. Now there is some funky stuff in there because LaMelo's played more with the backups than I think Rozier has, and that affects it. So I think that's small sample size. But it is absolutely something that the stats so far, the Hornets haven't been bad with Rozier playing point guard. That has not been the issue for them, like some people thought it would be. Okay, Gordon Hayward, moving on. Look, overall, he had that really good game against Indiana where he was like hunting Mathurin and just absolutely abusing him in the post. That was great to see. But I think overall he's been solid. Look, he's a 33-year-old, 34-year-old vet now. We know what Hayward does. I don't think he's going to shock anybody coming into the year and be like, whoa, what's he doing now? But generally, like he's been a good player who's fit into a wider system. And I just don't know if that's what the Hornets paid for. Like your top paid player, your max, essentially a max guy. I sometimes feel that he goes missing for long periods of the game and he doesn't influence the game all the time. Now his usage is back to his same levels as first year is in Charlotte. And he's a really good kind of third scoring option, 43% from 3 this year, but only taking 2 a game. You know, this team needs to shoot more threes. We touched on that. So I think he's been good, but he's looked to me like he's playing in a role that like it's very comfortable for him. And I think for this team to maybe take it to the next level, they need a little bit more from him. So I think it's been a perfectly solid start offensively for Gordon Hayward. The shooting has bounced back. The defense, I think, has actually looked a little bit better than in previous years. And I think that's the biggest clue to some of the better defensive games he's had. He just looks healthier, right? His closeouts have been really, really sharp. He's had some strong interior play. He's actually got a good block rate so far. And I think that defensive effort shows up from being healthy. And he does look healthy to me. So that's definitely a positive. As long as he can stay healthy, like he is going to help this team in a lot of ways. Like his assists are way up this year. He is being used a little bit more as a playmaker so far. So he's been always like a connector rather than maybe the scoring foundational piece that maybe we thought he was going to be when he signed in Charlotte.
See, to me, I think he's like comfortably been the best player on the team so far this season. Yeah, like I think pretty noticeably. He's at 17 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 stocks per game, which I think is definitely something that's gone a little bit underrated. Not only his just the quality of his defense, but the production that he gets in turning the ball over. And he's also, I think he's at nearly 1 block per game right now. So he's definitely been a very versatile piece on that end. I think his point of attack defense is still just as good as it was last year, like down the stretch. I thought that was one of the biggest parts of the Hornets defense, kind of flipping around down the end of the stretch last year and becoming that top 6 defense they were after Valentine's Day. I mean, I think he definitely has left a little bit on the table in terms of like his efficiency from 2-point range, because I think he exploded in the first half against Dallas. I think he had like 16 points or something like that in the first half, and then he finished like 8 for 22 from the field. So he kind of dropped off of a cliff in the third and fourth there when they needed him. And the 3-point volume, like you said, could definitely be a little bit higher given the efficiency that he has right now. If you're going to shoot over 40%, you can definitely bump that up the volume a little bit, even if the efficiency takes a little bit of a dip from there, especially given LaMelo and Terry's struggles from 3. They could definitely use another like high volume, efficient 3-point threat. But other than that, like I think he's been really, really good creating for himself and others. He's gotten to his spots in the mid-range and the low post really well. And I think the biggest reason for that is, like you said, the health is back. Like he had all summer, and this is something that the pretty much everybody that in the Hornets front office and Gordon himself had mentioned when you asked them about it. Having a full summer of like healthy workouts and not having to rehab an injury, just being able to go to the gym, work on whatever you need to work on that day, keep yourself in shape throughout the entire summer, and then come into training camp ready to go is huge, not only for like your individual like skill development, but just the confidence that you have. Like he's clearly, I think, attacking the rim with a much like more aggressive and just not necessarily like reckless abandon, but he's clearly like when he went up for that lob, like that was not, he was not looking to like protect himself at all against Dallas when he caught that one from LaMelo. Like
he has one sneaky lob every year where everyone goes, "Oh, it's back."
See, I definitely agree with that, but like it's usually not in like the first week of the season, and he's not looking to. And then he had that cut for like off of the from the baseline where he just made that like one quick decisive move to the basket off the baseline, and he finished there. Like everything just seems a lot quicker and just maybe a little bit more like bouncier, vertical. Like he's the lift that he gets on those pull-ups, and like when he gets a defender in jail and gets a guy on his back and he pulls up with a free throw line, he gets pretty good lift on those jumpers to be able to shoot over like a drop big that's defending. Like it just seems like his game just has a little bit more pop to it right now than it has in the last couple of years, and having that healthy summer definitely helps. So to me, he's been the best player on the team so far. I definitely see why people would think otherwise, because I think he's only fourth in field goal attempts per game. So he's not their number one option necessarily, but I think he's been the most effective with the opportunities he's gotten so far.
You know what? I think you've almost kind of convinced. Maybe I think I'm taking Gordon Hayward for granted because it's just like what I expect. But then, like, you're right. I was surprised when you said he's the best player on the team. And then I looked at the team and I was like, actually, yeah, he might have been. Like, so I think you're right. I think I've been maybe taking Gordon Hayward for granted a little bit, and I think you made some very valid points.
Stop. Hammer time.
Oh,
hey, that's timing on that one, right?
Look at that. That was synergy right there.
Right. You can take us into your next one, PJ Washington.
All right, PJ Washington. I mean, while we're on the topic, I think PJ is probably the only guy that could compete with Gordon for maybe best player on the team through 6 games title right now, which is a very illustrious award to have. I'm sure that the winner of this award is going to have it on their mantle once we send it to them. But PJ's been great so far this year. The mid-range and floater game in particular has been so good. And this is something we talked about like periodically throughout last season because he was flashing it a little bit in those games where he was like the number one option and would have those big scoring nights. I think OKC, when he had that career high, he made a bunch of those little like Rashawn Holmes-esque push shots, like shrugging off the contact and flipping the ball like over his shoulder, like out in front of himself a little bit. He might be like the new innovator of those shots now that Rashawn Holmes just seems to be like banished to the bench in Dallas. Like PJ is probably the foremost purveyor of the mid paint, like push shot from 8-ish feet, like flipping it over your shoulder. And he's just so strong and fluid and has the size to shoot over like enough defenders, both like bigs or smaller bigs and bigger wings, that like he really can match up against pretty much any team. Like there aren't that many teams that are going to have a guy that can just lock down PJ, both like as when he gets downhill or being a guy that can just find some spaces and get open as like a floor spacer, because there aren't that many bigs that can stretch it the way that he does. And there aren't that many wings that can keep up with him in terms of strength when he drops his shoulder into you in the middle of the paint and creates that contact. So, I mean, he's been very efficient so far. He's 55% from the field, second leading scorer, hasn't rebounded well. And that's been like the team's biggest weakness, I think, so far to me, defensive rebounding. So I'd like to see a little bit more there, but otherwise I've loved pretty much everything from PJ so far this year.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted about those exact plays earlier today, so you can go find it on my timeline. PJ Washington is currently shooting 70% at the rim and 52% from the mid-range. And that's in large part just down to these, like, they're not even Euro steps, because Euro step, you kind of go like one way and back the other. He just kind of drives and then just suddenly jerks to one side. It's like a half Euro. We need to come up with a name for it. That's a challenge for listeners or a challenge for you for next week, Chase. We need to come up with a name for the PJ Washington floater. Like there has to be something we can do there. PJ Washington's looked really good. You think about the skill development he's had since a rookie. He came in as a 3-and-D guy. He just shot threes, stood in the corner and shot threes. He was good at it. But now you can see that he scores in the pick and roll. He's a good pick and roll dive man or a pop guy. He's more pull-up game now in that mid-range if he kind of gets run off the line. He has that floater game. He's really diversified his offensive game since coming in as a rookie. And that's just incredible to see. Like it's hard when you look back, but year by year, he's just built this slowly, and it seems to be coming together this year, and he's finding some consistency. Now, can we call it consistency after 6 games? No. But so far, he hasn't had these, 2 of 12 performances where he just disappears. He's been impactful in every single game he's played so far. If he can keep that up, just what he's doing right now for the rest of the year, that would be a great season for PJ Washington. You mentioned the defensive rebounding. Look, it's still a massive issue, and it's actually got worse this year, not better. And it was already probably one of his biggest weaknesses as a power forward. At this point, maybe we just have to get used to the fact that like PJ is just never going to be a rebounder. And that probably does limit your ceiling as like a 4-man guy who shoots the ball. You need to have like an absolute glass eaters all around you. Luckily for him, like LaMelo Ball is a great rebounder. So that kind of does fit well with the Hornets team specifically. But yeah, I think PJ's had a really good start to the season. And I think you're right. Probably the guy challenges Gordon Hayward for best start to the year. Do you think we've got some time left here on the timer? Do you think PJ Washington, with his start to the year, do you see him moving to the bench when Miles Bridges comes back in 4 games?
See, that I honestly haven't even thought all that much about that yet. Right off the bat, I think I'd say no. I think I would probably, at the moment, I think you kind of have to give him the benefit of the doubt, like reward him for his performance in the season and kind of just tell Miles, like, hey, he's been playing really well. One of the best players on our team right now. Like, we just gave him a new contract. Like, you got to work your way back into the lineup in the same way that he had to work his way back into the lineup when Miles originally burst onto the scene a couple of years ago. Like, PJ got relegated to the bench and then worked his way back up and became the player he is now. So I feel like you got to give him credit for that.
I absolutely agree. And I'm someone who at the start of the year, I would have thought Miles Bridges will be starting. But when someone has played this well, and if he continues to do so, you gotta make him earn it, right? Miles got to earn that spot back. And I also do think that second unit needs some of Bridges' playmaking, maybe a little bit more as well, and that could fit there. So, as he gets into NBA shape, I think that makes sense. We still got time left, but let's not waste it. Let's move on to our next guy, which is going to be Mark Williams. But before we do, I want to quickly tell you about our online t-shirt store. If you haven't checked it, in the show notes on your podcast or on YouTube, wherever you're listening or watching this, you'll see we now have a link to an online store where you can buy an All Hornets Podcast Network t-shirt. We have a couple of quotable t-shirts on there. I think we have Hotter Than Fish Grease, and the other one we have is Hum Diddly Dee. So if you like to show the passion of a Hornets fan and get your nice little niche hardcore fan t-shirts, there's not many better places to go. So you can find that in the show description for this podcast. Also, want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by allhornets.com, a credentialed Charlotte Hornets media outlet powered by Sports Illustrated. Allhornets.com aim is to bring you 360-degree coverage on all things Charlotte Hornets, from breaking news, rumors, fan Q&As, in-depth analysis. Allhornets.com does it all, and nobody does it better. Okay, let's move on. Mark Williams. I'm going to say this, and this is going to sound like an insult, but it's not. Mark Williams has looked like an average NBA starting center. And I want people to realize that's a good thing. That's by saying that, I'm saying he's better than 15 out of 30 other starting centers in the NBA, which, look, I know the Hornets' excitement for Mark Williams and fan excitement was off the roof. We did not know that before the start of the season. And he's only going to get better from here. So I think at this point, you can say he's like a top 15 center in the NBA, and he's only going to improve. So, I mean, would you think that's a fair statement, Chase?
Completely fair assessment. I think right now he might be I don't want to say he's closer to 10, but he's definitely inching his way up there. I mean, career high,
We'd have to list the
27
guys,
points.
wouldn't we? We'd have to go through and list.
Yeah,
Maybe that's a
right.
job we can do later in the season here as we get into,
Yeah,
you know,
that's actually, yeah, that's a good
game
idea.
40,
On the air.
50. We can rank people in positions. That'd be a good episode.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, I have a feeling, especially by then, if the developments that we've seen so far continue, I mean, by then he definitely might be pushing top 10. So Mark
Yeah.
has been so good this year, like a career high 27 points against Indiana, 9 free throws in that game. The best thing about it to me is to be able to draw those free throws. It's not like he's, this overly deceptive big that's like drawing contact on like a bunch of pump fakes and like crazy like Alperen Şengün like spin moves or something like that. He's just corralling every single ball that comes into the relative area of where he's standing. And if he comes down with it, he goes right back up, and you basically have to foul him or else he's going to finish it. Because when you don't, he's shooting like high 60% at the rim, I think right now, or from the field overall. Like, you basically have to foul him or it's an automatic 2 points because he's just so big and has such good hands and can get pretty much, his catch radius is so wide, has one of the largest standing reaches recorded at the combine, if you're not other than Taco Fall. Like, there's just so many positives to him as like a threat just standing underneath the rim that you have to foul him or else he's going to score.
And for his size, he's so nimble. Like he's had a couple now, 3 or 4 alley-oop catches where the pass isn't quite perfect.
Like that one against the Pacers was ridiculous. That tip-in was
laid it up softly off the glass. Just unbelievable touch, agility, everything. It's just really special. He's so agile. I'm almost like worried he's going to get injured at some point because he's just like so flexible with what he can do. But you talked about his scoring efficiency. Currently, his effective field goal percentage, second in the NBA, 81%, behind Cason Wallace, the rookie for Oklahoma City Thunder, who is somehow at 82%. Just unbelievable offensive efficiency. I will say, I have been a little bit disappointed with his rim protection, and I can hear the Hornets fans booing here, but his block percentage has gone down. I think it's at 2% right now, which is basically bang average for a big man. And for like, his big selling point with coming in was to be an elite rim protector. That is not necessarily translated just yet. I don't think it helps being in a Steve Clifford system where Clifford doesn't want his bigs to foul. So I think he gambles a lot less than maybe what he would do at other teams. But the Hornets as a team are 12th in defensive rim percentage. And they were 3rd last year. And by playing Mark Williams, Nick Richards, basically 48 minutes a night, their big position, they should be like a top 5 defensive rim percentage team. And they haven't quite got there yet. So that is one thing, like I would say he certainly has moments. He's certainly, look, I'm not saying he's worse than Mason Plumlee. Don't get me wrong. We're in a different level here. But overall, I sometimes feel like I could see him getting his hands on just like a few more balls. But he does alter a lot of shots that doesn't block. But that's the same with all bigs who are, rim presence. They always have that there.
Yeah, and he's definitely just going to be a natural deterrent just due to his size. But it does seem like that one highlight block where he just like caught the ball out of the air against the Hawks is kind of like his only real rim protection highlight of the season. Like every other Mark's best moments that you'd think of from the year are all offensive plays right now, which is definitely fine. I mean, I was looking at this today because I was thinking about his pick and roll connection with LaMelo, which they're like palpable chemistry between the two of them. Like LaMelo finds him in the shooting pocket like so often when he's on the roll, and it just always ends up like right in Mark's hands, and Mark has the ability to go up on either side of the rim and finish with touch around the basket or just dunk the ball if he needs to. But he is scoring 1.6 points per possession as a P&R roll man right now. Like, it's like that is just crazy production, and all he has to do, he's such a good screen setter too, which just makes it even better because he takes advantage of his size in all of the ways that are necessary to be a good roll man, like great hands, great catch radius, nimble, sets great screens, strong, rolls hard to the rim every time, like looking to either score or make a play. Like he's not just doing it just to take up space. It's always with a purpose. Very, very good in that regard so far. And I feel like people weren't really looking forward to Mark as an offensive player when he came into the league, but he's been really good on that end so far. And I think the rim protection will become more consistent in time. So
I think it will as he learns players, as he gets more comfortable starting the scheme. But I agree. I think so far he's been better offensively, probably than he has been defensively. And I'm gonna disrespect. There we go. I'm gonna disrespect MC Hammer right now because I want to finish on this last point. You talked about the rapport building between Williams and Ball, and it's something I've noticed too. How many assists do you think LaMelo Ball has got with Mark Williams so far this season?
Total, like across the
total across all the games. I have the number.
I'll go 14.
9.
9. Okay.
Which ranks third. Now, this was taken from today, so I don't know if it had last night's data in from the Dallas game. I presume it did, but I don't know for sure.
I would imagine so, yeah.
That ranks third on the team. Who do you think the two people ahead?
Number 1, I'm going to guess is PJ.
Ding, ding, ding. 17 assists to PJ.
Yeah, I was going to say, that sounds right. A lot of those layups come off of LaMelo's. Is number 2 Gordon Hayward?
It is. Gordon Hayward,
there we
12.
Go.
Hey, you did well. You passed the test. Gold star for you. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. In my head, like, he was going to be higher. I just think that his assists to Mark are always so, like, loud and jump off.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Yeah. Okay, no more disrespect to MC Hammer. Let's move on to Brandon Miller.
All right, so I mean, I think this guy officially had his welcome to the NBA moment against the Dallas Mavericks. Brandon Miller, in his first career NBA start, was not a very effective offensive player in that game. Struggled to shoot from the floor, did not make a 3. I believe he was 0 for 5 from 3 in that game. I don't think he struggled like with a particular player or anything like that. Like the person defending him wasn't really the reason why. He just kind of faded out of the offense. He definitely didn't have that same like on-ball presence as he had in the first couple of games. He had a couple of like very timely mid-range buckets, but didn't really, show up all that much at the end of the game. Wasn't really a huge part of the crunch time performance there. He's obviously has been very good on the season still, but it was interesting to see in his first start, like kind of how he was utilized. It was strikingly similar to the first couple of games. I would be curious to see the lineup data, but I imagine that who he was on the floor with was pretty similar, like throughout the time, other than Terry Rozier being there. It didn't seem like he was given necessarily any more or less offensive responsibility with Terry out. It was kind of deferred to other players apart from Brandon Miller and maybe the other guys on the back end of the rotation that came in to eat some of the minutes as well. But I overall, I'm still very impressed with him on the season. We talked about him a lot in the last episode. He's still like the mid-range game looks great. He's a great ball handler for his size. James, what are your thoughts here on Brandon Miller?
Yeah, he's cooled off a little bit since our last episode. We can't duck that. Interesting. I was looking here. His usage this year is at 15.9%. That's a lower usage than Theo Maledon at 17.2. Which is a little bit of a shock, I think. And I think that's one thing. I think that's probably by design by Clifford. Like, he doesn't want to just go out there and just put Brandon Miller in pick and roll situations. He wants to ease him into it. He's still learning so much. And this is, I think, normal. That's going to creep up by the end of the year. I expect him to be probably like settling in. Somewhere probably similar to PJ Washington. PJ's at 18%. I imagine that's where Brandon Miller will get by the end of the year. But that's something that I just thought jumped out to me a little bit. Look, the defense is just where I've been most impressed. And I posted a kind of quick video on my Twitter page. I think it was after the Indiana game. In fact, it was at halftime of that game. So far this year, he has defended Trae Young, Luka Doncic, Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield. Like, these are some really, really difficult guys to guard. And he has been high effort, high IQ, locked into the game plan. Yes, he's still lacking strength, but his technique is just really exceptional. There's still been times he's picked up rookie fouls, but overall, I said this in my tweet, I think he's the best rookie defender Charlotte have had since Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. And if he gets stronger and once he gets more comfortable and has got used to playing against guys, we could be talking about a proper two-way player. Someone who really can guard the best players on the other teams. That's what he's been doing already as a rookie. So I think that's just super interesting, intriguing going forward. He's played about 50% of his minutes split between shooting guard, small forward so far. I think that's probably going to increase to shooting guard going forward with Rozier's injury. But you mentioned the Dallas game. I still think that's, it doesn't surprise me that his worst game has come on the first night of a back-to-back. Like, that's just not something that guys have to do in college. And you always hear about guys when they go into the NBA, that's the biggest adjustment they make, is the number of games, the travel. And no one's going to say this, but the mono will still be affecting him. Anyone who's had mono knows that this is not something that you just get over in a month. And I know we had it back in April, May, but that mono can stick with you at times for up to a year, for up to 18 months in some aspects. And when you're run down with lack of sleep, when you're tired, that's when mono like resurfaces. It can kind of like come back as a virus. So again, it wouldn't surprise me if that's some fatigue of that back-to-back game and that was something playing in there. But overall, I still like what I see. I'm excited to see him as part of the starting unit with Rozier out going forward. But yeah, I think he's still continuing to play well, looking smooth and controlled out there. And the fact that Steve Clifford is playing him so many minutes is just reinforces how well he's doing.
Yeah, I was going to say, he played 36 minutes in that loss to Dallas in his first start. The fact that he was that poor of a scorer in that game and was still trusted to play 36 minutes shows you that his defense was extremely good for the entire game. Like, he plays with effort. He plays with an edge, like chip on his shoulder on that end. He's extremely quick in rotation and always fighting around screens and stuff like that. He's definitely somebody that, like you said, could be that two-way wing that really this team has not had in, like, I don't want to say a decade because that just makes it sound sad, but like basically since like Gerald Wallace, like somebody that's like that high level of a player on both ends of the court at the 3 position. Like, it's tough to dig that far back, but
his feel
like,
for the game is off the charts.
He's really the only player that has that type of potential.
You're talking about both ends. I can't think of a Hornets player who, as not even as a rookie, just like having a wing that just reads the game as well as he does. It's been a long time.
Like Gordon Hayward was a good player at the time when they signed him, but he wasn't that level of defender. He was more of a brought in to be a scoring piece. Like Brandon Miller being able to do both, play both aspects and the court at that high of a level is something this team hasn't had in a while, and it's definitely nice to have in the fold so far.
Yeah. Okay, moving on to our rotation players. Nick Richards, almost averaging a double-double over his last 3 games. Look, the twin tower combo of Nick and Mark, we might have to come up with a nickname for that as well, because just right now, we talked about Nick Richards being one of the best backup centers in the NBA in the preseason, and I think he's been every piece of that. He had a slow start his first couple of games, but he's been on a tear recently. Here's the good and the bad, right? The good is right now, Nick Richards has the highest block percentage in the NBA at 5.4%. There is no one blocking more shots per minute than Nick Richards. What that doesn't take into account is the goaltends, and also that Nick Richards has the 5th highest foul rate in the NBA, which helps also give a little bit of context to that number, which it's not quite as impressive when you look into that, when you see that there's been several goaltends. He's been, challenging, probably over-challenging, being a little bit too aggressive going after shots. So there's the good and the bad, right? And finding a happy medium is where Nick probably wants to land eventually. But overall, just to be able to be leading the NBA in anything is impressive. So I think that's, potentially is reading the game a little bit better on the defensive end, being able to be in position to get some of these blocks. But mostly he's just picking up where he left off last season. He's not doing anything too different. He is just playing the same role. And I didn't find there's much to say about Nick, because you know exactly what you're going to get every single night. And that I say that in the kindest possible way, because the Hornets just do not have to worry about their center rotation, starting or backup, for the next 3 years. It's just not a concern. These guys are going to be the starting centers for this team going forward, unless there is some trade where you can get some big haul for Nick Richards and something else, and they decide to cash in. But look, the Hornets have had so many bad centers over the years. It's great that they finally have 2 not just adequate, but good ones.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about Mark that you thought he hadn't been gambling quite as much. Maybe Steve Clifford just told Mark, he's like, hey, man, you're the starter. We need you at the end of the games to close. Like, we need you out there on the court as much as possible. You can't gamble as much. Nick, lose your mind. Like, I'll go for it. Anything you want, just jump. Yeah, just if you think you can get it, just jump for it, grab it, like swat it out of the air. I don't care how close it is to the rim. I mean, but to be fair to Nick, that one against Dallas, that was a pretty big call in the moment. That I did not think was a goaltend. So that brought his numbers up a little bit, I think, even though he didn't quite deserve it. But either way, he's definitely much more of a gambler than Mark has been as a rim protector this year, unquestionably. Some of the like illegal screens and all that stuff are still there as well, but I mean, for like you said, for a backup center though, like you can't expect them to just have like no flaws or have nothing like that negatively impacts the game at any point. Like he finishes like almost as efficiently as Mark. Mark's 81% from the field right now. Nick is 76.2%. So not very far behind and on a very similar shot diet. Like Nick also is a very good screener, decisive roller. Has a wide catch radius, can be a lob threat, as well as somebody that can just catch it on the short roll and go up and finish. Like you really can't complain all that much about Nick. Like you said, there's not a ton to say about him, but it's not in any way a bad thing. Like he just goes out, does what he's supposed to do, what you expect him to do, does it well, and then that's pretty much it. And at the end of the game, you look up and he's got 8 to 12 points and 6 to 8 rebounds, and there you go.
If Nick was on the Dallas Mavericks, he would be starting in place of Derek Lively.
He would probably. I think he would average a double-double on the Dallas Mavericks. Like there's a
no question.
He started like
he would be 11 points, 14 rebounds, 2 blocks every single night. The Hornets don't have quite the same level of shooting and spacing, and obviously like players who are often committing 2 defenders like Dallas do. And that's why Derek Lively is able to put up such huge stats, because they've got 2 men essentially guarding Luka Doncic at all points. But he could start on various playoff teams. So I think Naz Reid still probably has the title as best backup center in the NBA right now, but I think Nick Richards is right behind him.
Yeah, completely agree. I don't want to cut us short here on Nick's time, but should we roll on to the JT Thor here?
Let's roll.
All right. So I don't want to take up too long here, because I think of all the players on the list that we're talking about here, all 9 of these guys, I think JT Thor is the one that I've have the least amount of positive things to say about through this season so far.
And say the negative things. Give us the negative things, Chase.
I know. I've never been somebody that was super high on JT anyway. Like coming out of the draft, I think he was a like mid-30s prospect for me. Was never somebody that really impressed me all that much in summer league or as a rookie or sophomore. And now like he obviously is far and away the best player from that 2021 draft class. Don't get me wrong, but I still just don't think he's really anything close to the offensive threat that the Hornets really like, not necessarily need him to be, because they're still a decent team with how he plays now. But if he was just a better shooter or had any of that off the dribble creation that he showed when he was at Auburn, like that would just help the second unit offense so much. Like I feel like we're watching these games so often and the second unit either scoring, playmaking, or shooting is just not there. And when LaMelo, Terry, Hayward, or some combination of those guys are all sitting, it's just such a clunkier basketball game. Like you can see that these players don't necessarily fit together as well. And if you just had like a spacing, like spot up 4 that could really stretch out the defense and attack a closeout and finish like athletically at the rim, drive a little bit. He doesn't even have to be like a playmaker or anything like that. Like it would just be such a big boost to the second unit offense. And JT is now in his 3rd year and hasn't been that really at all, like at any point in his career. He's a really good defender for his position, like no doubt about it, like 6'9", 3'4", like versatile, maybe a little bit of small ball 5 in a different system, but just not a whole lot there for me. And like this year has been pretty much the same deal, like low 30s% from 3, reasonably efficient from the field, but doesn't create enough to make it worth it, doesn't pass, not a rim protector, solid positional defender, but the role for that in the NBA is just ever shrinking, I feel like. So, but James, give us some JT Thor positiveness right now, please, unless you don't have any, and in which case we're in trouble.
Well, if we're talking about this year, I don't have a great deal, right? He's not had this. He's not carried on how he played at the end of last season, where in the last 15 games, JT Thor made major strides. And he's not,
Yeah, what did
had
he make a 3 in I think 15 games to end the season or something like that?
And just around that, his general play, like everything looked like it slowed down for him. The buzz out of training camp was pretty good around JT. But I agree, coming in, he just looks kind of like first half of the year JT from last year. And I still have some faith that it's gonna look better here. I think like you say, the lack of creation scoring in that second unit is hurt him a little bit. Like when he plays with Nick Richards, that is just two very low, like offensive skill guys in your front court, and you put such a load in your other three players. But I actually looked it up. JT Thor, when he plays with Mark Williams, and who is like much better offensive center than Nick Richards, just ability to probably finish around the rim. Like Nick is just a get jump offs,
play finisher.
Yeah. Mark has more craft. I think the defense pays more attention to Mark when he has the ball. When he's sharing the court with Mark or PJ and not Nick Richards, he's at like a plus 8.5 differential. So I think he needs to be the worst offensive player on the floor, and then he's okay because of his defense. But yeah, just puts a big load when he's playing right next to Nick. He still can't put the ball on the floor and do anything off the dribble because dribble is too loose. I still feel he struggles to process the games quickly. That's something that really improved last year, but it hasn't carried over yet. His usage rate is 9%. I mean, that is very, very low. The shot still looks smooth, and he shoots it with more confidence now, but doesn't quite go in as much as you hope it would. 33%. Is that right? I've got this down. 33% at the rim. Is that right? That's
33% from three. I think must be what you mistook. He's shooting 33% exactly from three right now.
Okay,
I think he's like 40 something percent from the field right now, 46 or so. So he must be a little bit higher at the rim, but still,
he's 50% at the rim.
Now that's still not great. Yeah,
I mean that's only 6 shots, but the fact that he's only taken 6 shots at the rim for like a 6'10" big is not great. And he didn't score out the rim last year. He was 50% as well, which is in the 5th percentile for all forwards, which is very, very low. So he's not a great shooter on the outside. He struggles to finish on the interior. Yeah. He's actually a pretty good mid-range shooter, but that's just a pretty narrow lane that he's trying to drive here. And the big thing for me is just the defense. It has not been the same level this year. This has been the big worrying thing for me. He's made some really bad coverage mistakes. That's what's supposed to be his strength. But absolutely so far, he's picked up bad fouls. He's sometimes lost players. He's not been able to close out well. And those have been some of the concerns for me. So look, it's been not a lot of great things to say about JT yet, other than I refuse to see that he's gone backwards from those last 15, 20 games last year. Maybe not refuse. I'm reluctant to see. I'm hopeful he's going to find that kind of form again because he did show it and the buzz was good.
I hope so too. I mean, the jumper has always looked smooth. So there's always a part of me that thinks that one of these days he's just going to catch fire and be a 40% shooter. Hopefully it's soon.
Okay, moving on to our final player, Theo Maledon. I can't say I have a lot of great notes here. Theo Maledon, look, I remember I was on this podcast saying that 6 or 7 games into the season, people are going to be complaining about Theo Maledon or Nick Smith Jr. playing backup point guard, and they're going to be the same people who are saying that the Hornets should just, shouldn't go out and sign anyone or trade anyone. And that's exactly what's happening. Theo has really struggled. Shooting the ball has just been a complete offensive liability. That said, I actually think he's defended really well in his minutes, but he's been playing as like a shooting guard. Steve Clifford does not trust Theo Maledon to be the point guard right now. He is always paired with Rozier or Ball, or it was Ish Smith for a very brief period last night. And it's just, if you can't shoot and you can't play on ball as a creator, even if he's good at defense, you just need to have more to your game to be an NBA rotation player. You can't just be too narrow in that skill set. So he was good in the Dallas game, especially in that first half, but he just lacks that offensive consistency night in, night out. So if anything, what we've seen so far for me is Theo Maledon is not a long-term point guard right now, or he's certainly not at the moment. Who knows how much that shoulder injury is still affecting him? It definitely still could be. But it's just he's been good defensively, but almost unplayable offensively.
Yeah, and I think I brought this up on the last podcast too. Like his jumper just does not look good, like mechanically. Like I definitely think that shoulder injury, maybe not pain-wise, is still affecting him, but just the lack of reps that he got in the preseason and during training camp seems to be affecting him right now as a spot-up shooter from three. I mean, he is just a complete non-threat, both off the catch, off the dribble. Really, the only way that he can impact the offense positively right now is when he gets a ball screen and can make a read out of it. But again, those situations are few and far between because, like you said, he's paired with another guard that's going to get the bulk of those reps anyway, because Terry and LaMelo are both better at ball screen navigation as a ball handler than he is. And B, he can't shoot and he can't drive and he can't get to the rim at a high enough rate to where any defense is going to like respect that and do anything other than just say, okay, here you go. You can take this, elbow jumper or whatever, which I think he made one against Dallas. And I think he made a 3 against them as well. But that was pretty much it. Like he kind of just faded out after that. He had like a quick 5 points, like in the first quarter, I think, with him and Nick Richards. And then after that, he was basically invisible for the rest of the game. And it's definitely like, right now, I probably would still say he's like the best option as a backup point guard, maybe until Ish gets like fully into game shape. But I mean, in like a week or so, I think of repeated performances like these for Maledon, I think Ish Smith is probably going to start getting the bulk of his minutes once he's, fully up to speed, if Theo keeps it up.
I mean, Ish was he had 1 foot in retirement. So I can promise you he probably wasn't training as hard over the summer as most of these guys.
Yeah, definitely.
It's like I was hoping that he would be able to come in and make more of an impact, but it's pretty clear, I think, that he's just not in physical shape yet.
I think I think the Pacers game was the first game he even dressed for, right? Like, I don't think he was even had warm-ups on until then.
Yeah. Nope, I don't have anything else to add to Theo. I mean, I think as we've seen, the bench options, Thor, Maledon, have not been great. The Hornets have not played a lot of guys, right? The fact they've only played 9 guys, I think I've seen it's like the lowest number of players who received minutes in the NBA so far. And I've seen some people try and throw that as a criticism towards Steve Clifford for that. I mean, let's look at the context here. I think that's for good reason. We got Miles Bridges suspended, injuries to Frank Ntilikina, James Bouknight, Cody Martin. You just signed Ish Smith out of retirement. I mean, you're talking about 5 players there who are just simply unavailable right now. Who do you want Steve Clifford to play? Nick Smith Jr.? Okay, I guess. But I just don't understand that criticism being put that way. I think Clifford is trying to win games, which I completely understand at this point in the season. And right now, I think playing the guys he's played has given him the highest chance. I don't have any qualms over really any of the rotation decisions yet.
No, I mean, the only player that you could maybe put in and expect to get a positive impact from is Nick Smith. Like, other than that, you're just down to your 2-way players, one of which is already in your rotation.
McGowan's who's been back recently.
Oh, true. Yeah, that's true.
So,
I was looking at the minutes log from the last game, and he did play 10 minutes in his season debut against Dallas. But even so, like, that's one guy. Like, that's it.
And he's playing with, like, obviously an ankle that is not 100%.
Right.
He's sprained twice. It's not like he is, full of beans and jumping up and down, ready to go. He is probably playing through something that is still sore and is still limiting him a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I'm completely with you. I would not, stretch out this rotation any further than it has been so far. I don't think that would be beneficial for the Hornets if they're trying to win games at all right now. So
yeah,
I'm totally with you. That I think the Dallas broadcast noted that when I was watching the game back this morning as well, and I thought that was a very cool nugget myself.
Yeah. All right, Chase, we are done with our first ever Hornets 9 and 60. We got through a lot of info there. Whew.
We did.
we need to pat ourselves on the back. You know, it's a lot harder to prep for a podcast where you have to talk about all 9 players than it is where you just talk about one. This took some time today. So thank you for listening. And if you made it all the way to the Theo Maledon section and you're still listening now, congratulations. You are a Hornets Secco, because to stay to the end for Theo is we respect you for that.
Yes, absolutely. If you're sticking around for Theo Maledon takes, then I regret to inform you, you are an intoxicated Hornets fan. But so are James and I. So you're not alone. That's at least the best part.
2 games this upcoming week. Washington Wizards. Big games. Got to play them twice. Chase, is anything other than 2 wins acceptable right now?
I think that would be huge if they could get 2. I don't know if I would be, too upset if they split, just because, playing the same team twice in a row, it's hard to beat a team in a 2-game set. But man, it'd be nice to beat what could very well be the worst team in the league right now, and the Washington Wizards, one that just does not seem to play a very cohesive, winning in brand of basketball. So it would be nice to get a pair of W's here. Get back to 500 as well, 4-4 through 8 games. It
feels pretty big, these 2 games. The Wizards have given up 143 points, 126, 130, 121. They did only give up 106 to the Memphis Grizzlies, who are obviously having their own issues.
The 1-6 Memphis Grizzlies, yeah.
Yeah. So we're talking about a team which is really struggling on the defensive end right now. So look, no Rozier, no Rozier, or with Rozier, this team have to come out this stretch, I think, with a couple of wins, because after this, the reason we've been so pushing that the start of the season is so important is because this is the easiest part of the Hornets schedule, the easiest schedule to date. After this, things are only going to get harder. So the Hornets need to fatten up on these easy games, and if they don't, then when it comes to a 4-game losing streak in December, when you're on the road in the West Coast, you can deal with that if you beat teams like Washington twice in a row. So big week for the Hornets. If they played like they did against Indiana, like they did against Dallas, they should be good enough. If they played like they did against Detroit and Houston, they're going to struggle, right? So we got to find some consistency. Hopefully LaMelo Ball is back on track, and if he is, they should have enough.
30-point triple-double, 10th of his career. Let's hope it gets him back on track. Thank you for listening, everybody.
Thanks. Catch you next week.